Swine It.
It's time for a new era of communication in the swine industry. One that you can get the latest updates while commuting or driving to farms. Here you have the brightest minds of the global swine industry in your pocket.
The biggest thing that I see around the world is that separates what I would say the best producers in terms of achieving high productivity and those that are not, is really around applying what we know from a science background and basics.
Welcome to Swine It Podcast. My name is Marcio Gonçalves, your host for today's episode. This episode is brought to you by Gestal. Celebrating its 25th anniversary, Gestal manufactures the original wireless standalone swine feeding system. Designed by pork producers, for pork producers, they are simple, reliable, and provide peace of mind 24/7, 365. Gestal is not just an equipment manufacturing company, but a family pork production business with a SLAT-level understanding. So today's episode, we're going to talk about the past, present, and future of swine production and nutrition. And to talk about that, nothing better than having Dr. Mike Tokach with us. And he has been great, has influenced a lot the evolution of swine production and nutrition in the last several decades. So first of all, Dr. Tokach, thanks for your time and for being here today.
Thank you, Marcio.
So, Dr. Tokach, if you could start just telling us a little bit of your background. A lot of people know you around the world, but it's always good to learn from the source.
Sure. I grew up on a diversified livestock and grain operation, actually, in North Dakota, and we had a fairly large beef cattle operation with registered Angus cattle, and my brothers still run the ranch back there today.
Nice.
But I was one of the only ones that was really interested in the pig side, and we had about 150 sow farrow to finish operation, which was a decent-sized farm at that time. And so when I was looking at universities, I went in the pig area and got my master's at Kansas State University and PhD at University of Minnesota, and I've been back here at Kansas State University now for a little over 25 years.
Oh wow, yes, a long time, and a lot of studies that over that time. Do you have an idea of how many studies we've done over those?
Oh no, I don't. We did a look at it a few years ago on how many field trials we had done, and it was several hundred. So
Oh, wow.
I don't know exactly where we're at today.
I bet. Oh my gosh. Well, very good, Mike. So, what do you see as current trends and hot topics in this global swine industry today?
Well, certainly, probably one of the ones that's in the front of everybody's mind today is African swine fever and how it's moving around the globe, and that obviously is a major driver of a major thing on everybody's mind.
Right.
Besides that, though, the areas that I certainly get asked a lot about, and I see production systems making a lot of changes, is really around the antibiotic use, and whether it's legal, regulatory, changes that are driving it in some parts of the world, or whether it's consumer demands driving the antibiotic-free production in other parts of the world. That is definitely one of the things that's impacting production and how we feed pigs. The other area that as a nutritionist that is probably a growing concern that I see is mycotoxin levels, and we certainly have always dealt with some mycotoxins in the United States, but it's been a growing problem for us, particularly in the last 10 years as we've changed our agronomic trends.
Interesting. That is interesting on the mycotoxin. And you were talking about antibiotics, Mike, and I was thinking a couple years ago, you were talking about zinc oxide and the ban of that, in some countries. And
Yes.
Any information regarding that lately?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we know that with the changes coming down in Europe, where they're going to have to remove zinc oxide from all diets in a relatively short manner here, it's definitely on the front of all of their producers' minds. They've made some great strides in the area, but they still have some work to go. And I think what our research in that area is telling us is that there's not going to be one strategy that's going to very, very easy to replace zinc oxide in these early nursery diets. Right. I think it's going to take several different diet formulation changes in order to have comparable performance. Right now, I think that we're getting pretty good at being able to minimize the diarrhea issues, which is one thing that zinc oxide really helped cover up pretty well. So we're able to feed pigs and control the diarrhea, I think, without the zinc oxide, but that's still a challenge in some situations. But where we still struggle is to get the performance back to the full benefits of what the zinc oxide has provided us as a growth promotant in the first 15 to 20 days after weaning.
Right. That makes sense. And maybe changing management weaning weight or whatever we'll have to do.
Weaning age is going to be a big part of the answer. There's no question.
Great. Now, if we step back a little bit, Mike, and start thinking about the biggest breakthroughs over the last several decades. A lot of times people talk about radical innovation, so things that really, really changed our industry. What would be those things from a nutrition standpoint and maybe generally that you could comment on?
I'll probably start with some of the general ones, and as I look over my career, there's several across many different areas of major pork production in the systems, and probably the biggest one that comes to my mind first is the whole area of design of a production system around the health side, and what I mean there is when I got into the industry, we were still dealing with continuous flow production and farrow to finish operations were the predominant, almost the only way that pigs were being raised. And now we obviously see all in all out multiple site production, and it really was designed around controlling viral disease, and that led to many other changes and able to apply technologies and major breakthroughs because of these changes in the production systems. So as an example, that also led to the move from many small farms to large integrated systems and coordinated specialized production. The other thing that it allowed is the genetic selection to really be taken full advantage of. We had, when I was growing up, we did a lot of visual selection and single trait selection that was occurring. That obviously has been replaced with BLUP and with marker-assisted selection, and it just amazes me at how fast we're able to make genetic progress today. And some of those things, over my lifetime have, some of those have looked like they've been gradual changes, but in reality, those took some fairly large leaps to be able to get to where we are today. And another one of those that you could argue was a huge leap for us was artificial insemination. When that came in the early 90s, it started out as more of an experimental, being done at universities, but it took over the industry very, very quickly.
Wow.
And now, as I see how the new technologies, even in that area, with the PCAI and how that's influencing the genetic movement, and it's another area that I think outside of my world of nutrition, we've had major changes.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
In the nutrition side, probably a couple of the ones that I would point out is just it really kind of again goes down to precision of feeding, and when we started out, we were formulating on crude protein levels, and we had relatively simple diets, and as we've been able to measure both the requirements of the pigs more closely and be able to determine the nutrient levels and ingredients ingredients more closely, we've been able to become much more precise. And so, as an example, we went from crude protein to total amino acids to apparent digestible amino acids to standardized ileal digestible amino acids, and went from formulating to lysine and maybe adding some synthetic lysine to the diet to now we're adding 5 synthetic amino acids to the diet. And so we're able to get much more precise. And with that, as I mentioned, we need to know the amino acid requirements of the pigs. That has moved from more of a patchwork and a guesswork and maybe some sophisticated models that were difficult to apply on the farm, to a lot of production systems having their own research facilities to be able to understand their nutrient requirements in their own scenario with their ingredients under their conditions. And so that's led us to some big moves in terms of growth performance of the pig, but also reductions in feed costs that come with it.
Yes. Well, that's a lot of advancement, and it would be interesting for someone, one of the new grad students, go back and formulate a diet as you'd formulate 20 years ago, and just to see the cost savings there.
Yeah, it is interesting. North Carolina State did a study. Now it's been almost 15 years ago where they compared, if I remember right, it was around 1990 genetics and feeding program versus about 2005 genetics and feeding program, and what they showed the big improvements that we made in lean gain efficiency, and they looked at several different traits. But their summary, as again, this is as I remember it, was about half of the improvements were through genetic improvements, and about half of the improvements in lean efficiency were through changes in formulation that had occurred.
Oh, wow. Huh. So half and half between genetic and nutrition?
Nutrition, and that was a relatively straightforward study looking at those two major drivers and holding other things constant. It was a very interesting study that you think tried to get at that question, like you said, as how figuring out exactly how much change we've really accomplished.
Makes sense. And that was a pig or a poultry study?
It was in a pigs.
Okay, yes. Because I think I've seen the poultry one, 1957. They did a similar approach. I need to check out the pig one. Nice. Yeah. Very cool. So, Mike, as you travel around the globe, what do you think is the lowest hanging fruit today for majority of pork producers? And if you need to split by region in general, that would be great as well.
Well, I think the biggest thing that I see around the world is that separates what I would say the best producers in terms of achieving high productivity and those that are not, is really around applying what we know from a science background and basics. We know an awful lot about the science, as we talked about how to feed the pigs. We know an awful lot about the genetic selection. We know a lot about facilities, a lot about biosecurity. Those that are doing an excellent job or have great performance believe the science, they apply the science, and they have ways of tracking and testing, make sure that they're implementing things correctly. Those that I see that are sometimes struggling or are lagging behind, in many cases, they, for whatever reason, they choose to ignore some of the known information. They either through their own biases, through their production experiences, that they don't think that this science works for them. It's interesting to me, but that's really some of the areas that I see that separate people. I mean, a good example is we know that with most of our genetic lines now, we really need to full feed them in the farrowing house to achieve high productivity and high subsequent reproductive performance. But you still find people that want to be very careful around stepping sows up on feed intake and early lactation because they're worried about problems that the sows are going to have, or they're worried about constipation, and there's things that they worry about that our best production systems really have moved past.
Yeah. Well, yes, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned. Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, and you think about individual areas, I don't know if it's low-hanging fruit, but in the U.S., I think one of our major areas that I think we all realize looking at records is that mortality is an issue for us, and that's an area that I think we need to we need to apply what we know about it. There's some major efforts, and Pork Board obviously has put some major effort towards the whole mortality area, and again, getting back to some of the basics that we doing what we can to eliminate as many diseases as possible, because we know that the cost of living with them is too high. Doing the things that we can to minimize the mortality in the farrow and house, and those areas in the U.S. I think are some of our major drivers. I get into Europe. I'm amazed that I think they have some very, very good sow productivity people and have some excellent performance on the sow side. But probably the area that they lag behind us is on grow finish nutrition and cost. They for whatever reason, they don't put as much, I don't know if they don't put as much effort or they don't put as much resources towards the grow finish side as the sow side, but they definitely could learn from the United States, both on the feed cost, but also on the processing side with the size of our packing plants and the efficiency and the low cost of our processing systems.
Makes sense. And I think some of the European countries, they would be exporting, right, the wind pig, I guess, and
yes.
Maybe that's part of the equation there too.
No question, you're exactly right. As you emphasize and you put your efforts on what your profit drivers. There's no question.
Right. Very good. And you mentioned about production experiences, which I was thinking the other day I was reading a book and I was talking about the patterns of the human mind. Our brain is made to look for patterns. So sometimes in production it happened once, it happened twice, and you connect. Oh, that's why. Well, a lot of times it's not really why. It's just coincidence, right?
Yes.
And the blend between using science, use the experience. It's a fine line. Like you said, some producers are too heavy on the experience side, but not to having the science or the other way around.
Yeah, that's a good point, and the experience. I don't want to play down the experience because obviously it's quite important, and
right.
and so most of the best things that I've learned from producers, and
right.
and most of the breakthroughs that we've ever made in the swine industry have come from an ingenious or an intuitive producer that's tried to solve their problems, right. and so we can learn an awful lot by trying something new and testing something different on the production side, but we always got to follow it up with making sure, like you said, that what we think is happening is really science can prove that is the real reason that it happened, that it wasn't just by chance.
Right. I think one good example is the whole bump feeding discussion, right? Oh my gosh. Every time we try to prove that
Yep. Well, that's a good example, and you did a great job with some of the research there showing that you can influence the birth weight. It's just not very much.
Right.
You do a lot of effort on bump feeding, and it makes a very small change in birth weight, but at the same time, it may make it has a negative influence if it makes the sow fatter and it makes
right.
her have more difficulty in farrowing, or reduces her milk production or feed
right.
intake and lactation. So you have to do the science just like you did to prove what is the real answer.
Right. No, that makes sense. As we move forward here, Mike, what would be a big challenge from the industry today that you believe we will only fix if we try to think outside the box, if we stop thinking, what is something that we got used to that is a big problem, but we kind of are used to, or and what do you think we should be doing to be able to think outside of the box or make that leap?
Well, I talked about our move to multi-site production was done because we wanted to eliminate bacterial diseases, and that was really why that came into play, as we had a lot of big bad bacterial diseases that were causing us major problems in slowing down performance and hurting feed efficiency and causing mortality in the production systems. And so we moved to multi-site production, and it did a great job for us in controlling those bacterial diseases. The trouble is that the viruses figured out a way to live and prosper in that environment, and we've have some viruses now that we really struggle with in some of our systems when we break these high health systems with those viral diseases. And so for me is we need to figure out how to reduce the introduction of some of these outside diseases, and you can talk about PRRS, obviously, or the when PED came in, and the foreign animal diseases that we're trying to keep out today, or even the bacterial disease like mycoplasma that we know what the value is to remove that from a production system, right. and it's very, very good production when we have eliminated it, but it's really ugly when we break a negative system with mycoplasma. And so I don't know what that change is going to be, but we need to figure out a new way of dealing with these nasty diseases, because the cost of the breaks are still too high. And even with the filtered systems, with all the moves that we've made with our health status, we still break too many of the systems today.
Right.
So that for me is one of the biggest areas.
Yes, that's a big cost. I think a few months ago I was going back, and it's anywhere from $5 to $7 per pig, depending on the disease.
Yep. Yeah, and certainly the PRRS has its cost and mycoplasma has its cost, and you put the two together, and it seems like it's more than double that cost. It's right. More of a multiplication effect, and that's all the things we talk about in nutrition, and as a nutritionist, I think we've made a lot of advances, but I'm also very realistic that when we get into production system, if the health is broken, it's really difficult for us to make to fix it on the nutrition side. There's no question.
Right, that makes sense. What do you think are innovative areas, Mike, that are being worked right now in our near implementation? So you're always working different grants, different research there, Mike. What's right there and coming out?
Well, probably the one of the nearest term ones I see that is already some people are applying and that I think is really starting to move across our industry is the feed safety side, and we know that we now have a realization that it is a real concern. PED taught us that diseases move into our production systems. Obviously, feed isn't the primary way that it gets in, but it is one of the ways that diseases can move into the production system, whether that be through the feed truck, through the employee that's driving the truck, through the feed itself. And so we're seeing a lot of work done, a lot of innovation coming on ways to sanitize the feed, to prevent that being a method of introduction. And we still have a long ways to go there, but I see movement across our industry that is taking us what I think is down the right path to solving some of that issue and at least reducing it as one of our areas of concern. And so that would be a big one. Technologies, I don't know whether these are in the short term or long term, but some of the robotics and I know you had a good discussion on one of your podcasts about the whole Internet of Pigs area and Internet of Things and I think that's there's so much work going on in that area, and that we're bound to make some breakthroughs that are really going to help us on the people side, on being able to reduce labor and hopefully attract high quality and high level labor into our production systems by involving people from the outside that have to solve some of these problems. We're working on a relatively small project, but with AWS, with Amazon Web Services, and when I get on the calls with those guys, it always hits me as just how different their minds think, how different their lingo is, how they approach problems, we think we move at a fairly fast speed sometimes in our world. They move at a very fast speed in terms of how fast they expect results, or they move on. And so we need to be ready to engage them, but also be ready to have the information to keep their attention once we have them engaged in animal agriculture.
Yes, that's very insightful for sure. Yeah, it's probably a different speed, right? If you're writing a code, it doesn't work, right away, instead of waiting 6 months.
Yep.
Very nice. You touched a little bit on the robotics, Mike, but is any other area that you believe it's in early stage and might be more of a couple decades out or a decade out?
Well, the other area that I'm not sure whether, besides the technology, and I think we could talk about that a whole lot because there's so many different things going on there. But I think outside of that, and this maybe does tie to it too, is there's some innovative work being done on barn designs. And again, we've seen some moves there in terms of moving away from our traditional curtain-sided barns to tunnel ventilated barns, even in areas of the world that I never thought you would worry about heat. That they're putting in doing tunnel ventilated barns, both for the climate control for the pigs, but also obviously for the workers and for the comfort of people in the barns. Right. But I think that the whole area of dealing with reducing heat stress and heat abatement for our production systems, whether that be moving it into gestating sows or moving it into grow finish barns, is an area that when I was going through school a few years back, I never would have dreamed that we would be thinking about cooling finishing pigs the way that we're thinking about it today, or even gestating sows. We just assume we might need to take care of the farrowing house, but we never thought about it for gestating sows. And now that's becoming somewhat of a standard procedure on some operations, and I think I don't know if the innovation of building design, we've really not made any major changes in building design in the finishing side in 25 years. We've had some stair steps on it, but it's been 25 years probably since we've had a major introduction of new facility design. And the south side and farrowing houses, it's been 50 years, since we've, made any major shift. Most of them have been relatively minor changes, and as we've increased size. And so there's some things there that probably will happen certainly over the next 10 to 15 years, but I'm not sure exactly what direction they'll take.
Right. That makes sense. And you were talking there, Mike, and made me think of, is there any, like a challenge in the U.S. for startups or for student ideas of things like that? And I'm not aware if there is or not.
No, I don't. I'm not aware of that. We've talked about that a little bit. I'm on some of the National Pork Board Animal Science Committee as an advisor, and they came out with a technology call that came out of some of the discussion that production nutritionists around the table were really having about the need to engage young people and engage technology companies, and they left it fairly wide open and got some really interesting runs at that in terms of different ideas on technology, and I think that's gonna that kind of area is going to continue to grow, and I think you're right though, is that we need to have some of this these taking long shot, efforts that we and kind of the way they approached that was they know that they're not going to hit on every project that gets funded through that kind of a call. Right. But if you end up with one or two of those that makes a major impact on the industry, it will be well worth the investment of funding 8 to 10 of them.
Makes
as
sense.
An example.
No, yeah. That makes sense. Yes, if we're not failing, we are not innovating enough, right?
That's exactly right.
Very nice, Mike. Any closing thoughts as far as this whole area of past, present, future of production nutrition before we go to our 3 questions we ask every guest?
Well, as somebody that works at the university, I think I'd probably be remiss not to talk a little bit about kind of the changing of how I see research being funded in the United States and
Right.
the funding going towards that, we've definitely seen a move towards privatization of research on the swine side and all of animal agriculture and all of agriculture in general. And I've watched in my career when I was coming through school, the UK was really kind of one of the leaders in the swine nutrition world and in swine production. And I think a lot of people today that aren't aware of that would think, well, how were they the leaders? And
Right.
they don't have very many pigs in England anymore.
Right.
Well, what happened is their country really kind of divested of funding production research and research in general, and I see how, because China has surpassed us in agricultural spending for research and in the last couple of years, and we're in danger of ceding our leadership in the United States if we don't keep up some of that effort, and I obviously worry about who's going to train the next generations if we don't have people training the new people coming through and showing them how to do the research in these production systems that we have going today. And probably the piece that ties to that is I want to make sure that people need to understand that they've got to look at other countries and look at research being done around the world, because there's a lot of very high quality work being done in Brazil, being done in China, being done in Europe that we can learn from and we can bring back and apply on our operations in the United States.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense, Mike. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. As we move to the end here, Mike, so the 3 questions we ask every guest, every episode. The first one is, what's your favorite swine-related book?
Well, you probably know the answer to this one, Marcio. For me,
NRC?
probably the book. Yes.
Okay.
the book that I probably use more than anything, and I know that the NRC gets beat up quite a bit at times because of it. It gets put together and it becomes kind of that dartboard on the wall that everybody can throw things at. But it really is a good resource, and it provides a placeholder that we compare everything to, and so the nutrient requirements of swine, the NRC is, and the 2012, of course, being our last issue or version of it, that's the one that I certainly probably use as much as any book in the swine world. There's some other ones I really like, but that one's certainly the one most used.
Right. That's a great answer. Is there any indications of the next one at all or not?
Not anything that I'm aware of real soon. It was 14 years between the 98 and the 2012, and I'm afraid it's probably going to be something like that before the next one gets done too. Okay.
How about a book that's not related to swine, Mike?
Yeah, one that I enjoyed was and taught me a lot about teams was 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. That book I really enjoyed, and it's really an easy read. It's written as a story, as a fable kind of put together by Patrick Lencioni. It's a very nice book.
Interesting. I'll add that one to my list as well.
Yeah,
list of books is crazy, right? You cannot read fast enough to you add faster than you read, so
that's exactly right.
Very nice. And the last question, Mike, what do you think sets apart successful swine professionals?
Okay, well, I have a list of traits that I kind of think about, and I think about these whenever we are looking for graduate students that have interest in the swine world, and when we're interviewing graduate students, they have to be a team player. Any production system, any business that you operate in, and certainly our group here at K-State, you've got to be able to work with others to be able to survive. Work ethic, of course, is a must. Being responsive, being adaptive, being inquisitive, and wanting to know why is a very important piece to me. And you can't do any of these without having a passion for the area that you're working in, and so those would be the things that I really look for.
I love that. Yes, very to the point there. I like it. Very good, Mike. Well, Really appreciate your time. I know it's very valuable, and yeah, thanks so much to sharing your thoughts with us and the audience.
Anytime, Marcio. Thank you very much for having me.